The fluorescent light in the corridor outside the Hartwell Medical Center boardroom had been flickering since Friday. Curtis Daye had noticed it the first morning it started, the way the bulb stuttered every 11 seconds like a small, mechanical heartbeat losing confidence. Nobody had filed a work order until Monday. He had arrived to fix it at 6:38 on a Tuesday 40 minutes, before the most important board meeting in the hospital's 30-year history. Because that was the kind of timing life had developed a habit of handing him. He parked his cart beside the access panel, opened his toolkit, and began working with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned how to become invisible in spaces that were not built for him. The corridor outside the boardroom on the 4th floor was all dark walnut paneling and framed portraits of donors whose names appeared on wings of the building. Curtis fit here the way a work boot fits a marble floor, functional, present, and slightly out of place in a way most people preferred not to acknowledge. Inside his chest pocket, folded once, was a note in second-grade handwriting. "Don't forget my permission slip, Dad. It's due today." His daughter Phoebe had underlined the word today 3 times with a purple crayon and slid it under the bathroom door while he was getting dressed at 5:15 that morning. He had laughed once, alone in the bathroom, and then stood very still for a moment the way he sometimes did. When Phoebe did something so completely herself that the grief of raising her without Janet came and went in the same breath. His wife had died in this building, oncology ward, 3rd floor, 2.5 years ago. He still used the service elevator to avoid passing that hallway. He had been a different person then. Not better or worse, just different in the way that a structure is different before and after load-bearing walls are removed. He had held a senior role at a biomedical systems firm in Chicago, auditing medical equipment contracts and compliance frameworks for hospital networks across the Midwest. He had understood bond covenants and regulatory language the way mechanics understand engine noise, by pattern, by feel, by the instinct that forms when something has lived in your hands long enough. Then Janet got sick, and then the bills arrived, and then she died, and then Phoebe was 7 years old and terrified and needed someone to be home when she got off the school bus. And the senior role in Chicago stopped being a career and started being the thing that was making all of it worse. So he left it. Took his electrician's certification from a community college program he had completed in night classes over 18 months, applied at Hartwell because the benefits were good and the schedule could bend, and spent the following 2 years becoming the man the hospital called when something needed fixing before anyone important arrived. He was good at it. He was good at most things he put his hands to. That had never been the problem. The light steadied. He was replacing the secondary driver when the boardroom doors opened and a young administrative assistant came through at speed, arms full of document folders and a travel mug balanced with the precarious optimism of someone running 3 minutes behind. One of the folders caught the doorframe. The top layer of papers shifted. A single folded page separated from the stack entirely and drifted, slowly unhurried, the way paper falls when it has nowhere particular to be, and landed open beside his tool cart. Curtis reached for it automatically. He meant only to set it upright against the wall where the assistant could collect it on her return. Then he read the header, then the clause beneath it. He stopped breathing for approximately 4 seconds. The page was part of a contract, a strategic partnership agreement between Hartwell Medical Center and PharmaDyne Corporation. The clause his eyes had landed on was titled Formulary Management and Exclusive Supply Rights, and the language inside it was the kind of language that appeared ordinary to people who had not spent 3 years auditing healthcare compliance documents. To those people it sounded like efficiency, like partnership, like the reasonable language of a hospital choosing a vendor. Curtis Daye was not one of those people. He read the clause twice, then once more, slowly. Then he looked up toward the boardroom doors, and back down at the page, and felt something cold settle into the center of his chest that had nothing to do with the early morning air conditioning. If Hartwell Medical Center signed this agreement, it would transfer exclusive pharmaceutical purchasing authority to PharmaDyne across all 6 departments named in the schedule. That alone was not the problem. The problem was that Hartwell operated under nonprofit bond financing, a $200 million issuance from 7 years ago that carried a covenant requiring the hospital to maintain autonomous control over all clinical supply chains. It was a standard protective clause buried in bond indentures that most hospital executives never read past page 4. Curtis had read documents exactly like it, dozens of them, in a previous life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Signing this contract would trigger that covenant, automatically, immediately. The hospital would owe $180 million in accelerated bond repayment within 90 days. The assistant had not come back for the page. Inside the boardroom, through the closed door, he could hear voices, the formal, muffled cadence of a meeting already underway. Curtis stood in the corridor for 12 seconds, which is a long time to stand still when you are holding evidence that a hospital is about to financially destroy itself. He thought about Phoebe's permission slip. He thought about the fact that his shift ended at 2, and he had never once been late for school pickup. He thought about the way Janet used to say that the most dangerous thing a person could do was know something important and decide it was someone else's problem. He picked up the page, knocked twice on the boardroom door, and opened it. There were 11 people at the table. Curtis registered all of them in the 3 seconds before anyone spoke. Board members in dark suits, a pair of outside attorneys, a young compliance analyst near the window with a laptop open, and at the far end, standing at the presentation screen, a man Curtis had not seen before. Late 50s, silver-haired, expensive suit, the particular brand of self-possession that comes from spending decades as the most confident person in every room he entered. Craig Westlake, the outside restructuring consultant the board had brought in 6 weeks ago. Curtis had heard the name in maintenance conversations, the way people in a building hear everything. Through vents and service corridors, and the particular silence that falls when workers are nearby and executives forget it. At the head of the table, Miriam Stokes looked up. The president and chief executive of Hartwell Medical Center was a woman who had run this hospital for 11 years through 2 recessions and a pandemic. And she looked at Curtis the way people look at a maintenance worker who has opened a door during an executive session. Not unkindly, but with the specific confusion of someone whose mental model does not include this. "Can I help you?" she asked. Curtis held up the page. "This fell in the corridor, ma'am. I think it's from your meeting." He paused, "and I think there's a problem with it." Craig Westlake turned from the presentation screen. His eyes moved from the page to Curtis's uniform to his badge, and then settled somewhere around Curtis's collarbone, the way certain people look at workers. Technically at them, but not quite. "Close the door on your way out," Westlake said, "please." Curtis did not close the door. He was aware of how this looked. He was aware that he was standing in a carpeted boardroom in gray work clothes with a tool smudge on his left forearm and a folded permission slip in his chest pocket, and that every person at this table had several advanced degrees and a salary that probably cleared more in a month than he cleared in a year. He had learned in the years since Janet died that awareness of how things looked and the decision about what to do next were separate operations. "There's an exclusive formulary clause on page 7, he said, keeping his voice level. "Section 4.2, if that's in the final agreement, it may conflict with your bond indenture covenants." Silence. Miriam Stokes looked at him with an expression that had shifted from confusion to something harder to read. "What did you say?" "Your 2017 bond issuance, Covenant 12.4, autonomous control over clinical supply chains. If PharmaDyne gets exclusive purchasing authority, that covenant is breached. Automatically." He said it clearly, without inflection, the way he used to explain systems failures to hospital executives in conference rooms, not unlike this one. "It triggers an acceleration clause. The full bond balance becomes due." Westlake laughed, a short dismissive sound that was designed to do specific work in a room like this. "You fix electrical panels," he said, with respect. "Yes, sir." "Then let the people whose job it is to review contracts do their jobs." Curtis nodded once. "I'm sure they've reviewed it. I just want to make sure that clause was flagged." He looked at Miriam Stokes when he said it, not at Westlake, because he had read enough rooms to know which person in this one would actually listen. Miriam had not looked away from him since he spoke the word covenant. She turned now to the young analyst near the window. "Sam." The analyst, Sam Obi, according to the badge clipped to his lanyard, straightened in his chair. "Pull the 2017 denture," Miriam said, Covenant 12.4. Westlake stepped forward. "Miriam, we have PharmaDyne's attorneys on a call in 20 minutes. "Then they can wait 20 minutes. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be Sam. Sam's fingers were already moving across his keyboard. Curtis set the recovered page flat on the conference table and stepped back against the wall, because he had delivered the information and the rest of it was not his room. The silence that followed had a different texture than boardroom silence usually does. It was not comfortable. 2 of the board members exchanged a glance. One of the outside attorneys leaned forward slightly. Sam stopped typing. He stared at his screen for 3 seconds, which is a long time when 11 people are watching you. "Covenant 12.4, he said slowly. Autonomous operational control of all clinical supply procurement, including pharmaceutical inventory. He scrolled. Breach triggers acceleration on the full outstanding balance. Another scroll. Outstanding balance as of last quarter. He stopped. $179 million. No one in the room moved. Westlake recovered first. That covenant language is standard boilerplate. PharmaDyne's legal team has already reviewed it. The partnership structure is designed to comply. The clause says exclusive, Curtis said quietly from the wall. Sam looked up from the laptop. He's right. The word exclusive in 4.2 would give PharmaDyne final procurement authority. That's not compliance, that's transfer of control. One of the board members, an older man near the center of the table, leaned back in his chair with a sound that was not quite a word. Westlake turned toward him immediately, recalibrating. There are corrective amendments we can draft before signature, Westlake said. This is a language issue, not a structural one. The partnership itself is sound. The hospital cannot afford to walk away from this deal. Why not? Miriam asked. Westlake blinked. The financials. Walk me through them again. Her voice had changed, not louder, quieter, slowly. Curtis watched Westlake's expression do something interesting. It did not fall exactly. It recalibrated. A subtle internal adjustment, the kind a person makes when a conversation they believed they controlled has taken a turn they did not anticipate. The operating deficit this fiscal year is projected at $34 million, Westlake said. Reserve levels are below the 30-day threshold. Two of the facility's largest payers have renegotiated reimbursement rates downward. Without the PharmaDyne capital infusion, the hospital will enter a liquidity crisis within 14 months. Sam had not closed his laptop. His eyes moved from Westlake's presentation slide to a different file he had quietly opened on the second half of his screen. Curtis noticed. Sam's expression had taken on the careful blankness of someone who has found something they are not yet sure what to do with. Curtis spoke before he fully decided to. Can I ask where the operating deficit figure comes from? Westlake turned toward him with the controlled patience of someone managing an inconvenience. The financial model prepared by my team. Is it reconciled against the hospital's own internal ledgers? A pause, not long, but there. Of course. Sam's fingers moved. Curtis watched the analyst's face change the way faces change when a number on a screen does not match the number it should. The internal ledger shows a $21 million deficit, Sam said. His voice was careful, not 34. Rounding methodology, Westlake began. That's not rounding. Sam turned the laptop so the board could see both figures side by side. That's a $13 million difference. The elderly board member straightened. The attorney beside him pulled a folder closer and began reading. Miriam Stokes had not moved, but something in her posture had changed. The kind of stillness that precedes action, not the kind that accompanies uncertainty. Where did the $34 million figure originate? She asked Westlake. The consolidated model incorporates projections. From whose projections? Another pause, longer. Curtis had been watching Westlake's hands. They were folded on the table, very still, the deliberate stillness of a person keeping them controlled. He had seen that kind of stillness before. In audits, when the person on the other side of the table understood that the next answer would change the shape of everything. My team's proprietary analysis, Westlake said. Based on what inputs? Payer trend modeling and operational benchmarks. Miriam turned to Sam. Pull every input file that Westlake's team submitted to us. Westlake stood immediately. Those files contain proprietary firm methodology. I can't authorize their review without. You were hired by this board, Miriam said. Everything you submitted to this board belongs to this board. Sam had already started pulling files. The room had begun to do the thing that rooms do when power shifts. Not loudly, not with announcement, but in the way chairs adjust and eyes move, and the person who had been controlling the tempo of the conversation suddenly finds themselves several beats behind. Curtis stood against the wall and said nothing because there was nothing more for him to say. The information had been given. The people whose job it was to do the rest of it were doing it. He thought about Phoebe's permission slip. He thought about the fact that this building had a third floor he still could not walk past without his chest going wrong. These payer projections, Sam said after 8 minutes of quiet that felt like much longer. 3 of the largest contracts, he's modeled them at a 15% reimbursement reduction, but the actual negotiated rates from last quarter show 8%. Sam highlighted the cells. If you correct the projection to actual rates, the deficit drops by another $9 million. That's modeling error, Westlake said. It's the same direction as the first error, Sam said. He was 26, Curtis estimated, and was trying very hard to keep his voice steady and not entirely succeeding. Both errors make the hospital look worse than it is. The attorney near the center of the table put down her folder and looked directly at Westlake for the first time. Miriam Stokes stood. She moved around the table slowly, came to stand beside Sam's laptop, and studied the numbers herself. She was not a financial analyst, but she had run this hospital for 11 years. And 11 years teaches a person what numbers should look like, even when the specific formulas are unfamiliar. She looked up at Westlake. Who does your firm represent besides Hartwell? The question arrived like something dropped from a height, simple, clean, and heavy when it landed. We represent multiple healthcare clients. All engagements are fully disclosed. PharmaDyne. The word sat in the room. Westlake's expression did not collapse exactly. Something behind it did. PharmaDyne is a separate engagement under a different service division. There is no overlap. You are sitting at this table advising us to sign an agreement with a company that pays your firm. Miriam's voice was not raised. It was the opposite. That is a conflict of interest. Did you disclose it to this board? Nothing from Westlake. Sam, Miriam said, pull our engagement letter with Westlake's firm. Sam pulled it. He scanned it. He looked up. Deflizer of concurrent client relationships is required in Section 3. PharmaDyne is not listed. Westlake pushed back from his chair. I need to speak with my legal counsel before. You will not leave this room, Miriam said. It was not a request. There was no rise in her voice to indicate she expected it to be treated as one. Westlake stood anyway. He gathered his folio with the practiced efficiency of a man who had walked out of difficult rooms before. You can't compel me to. Corporate security for this facility reports to this board, Miriam said. Sit down or I make a call. He sat down. Curtis had been very still against the wall. He was thinking about something Westlake had said earlier. The hospital cannot afford to walk away from this deal, and about the way the same sentence could be engineered to be true or false, depending on which numbers you chose to put inside it. He was thinking about a particular kind of damage, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that happens when a person in a position of trust decides the outcome first and builds the evidence second, and everyone around them is too busy, too trusting, or too pressured to look closely at the foundation. Mr. Daye. He looked up. Miriam Stokes was looking directly at him, and the expression on her face was not the one she had worn when he first opened the door. How did you know about the bond covenant, she asked. The question was direct and fair, and he had known it was coming, and he had already decided to answer it honestly. I wasn't always an electrician, he said. No one in the room moved, he continued. I spent 9 years as a biomedical compliance analyst. I reviewed contracts like this one for hospital networks, bond indentures, covenant structures, supply chain agreements. I can read that kind of language the way most people read a street sign. He looked at the floor briefly. I left that work when my wife got sick. She was a patient here. Oncology, 3rd floor. He paused. When she died, I needed to be home in time to pick up my daughter from school. Contract analysis doesn't accommodate school pickups. Maintenance does. The room was very quiet. The attorney near the center of the table had stopped writing. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s, looked at him with an expression he recognized. The particular look of someone recalibrating a category they had placed him in without realizing they had done it. Sam said nothing, but he had stopped typing completely. Miriam studied Curtis for a long moment. Not the way people look at someone they are trying to categorize. The way people look at something they almost missed. You saw a single page in a corridor, she said. I saw a pattern I'd seen before, he said. Once you recognize it, it's hard to miss. She nodded once. Then she turned back to the table. We are not signing anything today. Sam, I want every document Westlake's firm submitted to this board in a separate folder within the hour. Rebecca. She addressed the hospital's outside counsel, who had been listening from the far end of the table with the focused attention of someone building a mental timeline. I want to talk to you about disclosure obligations and what our options look like. Rebecca Thorne was already reaching for her phone. What followed was not dramatic in the way that things are dramatic in movies. It was the quieter drama of people doing difficult work under pressure, which is its own kind of tension. Spreadsheets were opened and reconciled. Calls were made and postponed. The PharmaDyne attorneys were told the signing would not proceed today without explanation. Westlake sat in the corner of the room with the particular stillness of a man calculating his remaining options, and when corporate security arrived, 40 minutes later at Miriam's request, he did not resist. He picked up his folio, looked once around the room, and when his eyes passed over Curtis, they stayed there for a moment. Not with hatred, exactly, but with the recognition that a man who believed himself invisible had turned out not to be. Curtis picked up his permission slip form from his chest pocket and smoothed the fold. Caught the gesture. Do you need to be somewhere? My daughter's school. They need a form by noon. She looked at him carefully. How old? 9. She turned to her assistant, who was standing in the doorway. Please call Carlisle Elementary and let them know Mr. Daye's paperwork will be hand-delivered before the end of business today, authorized by the hospital administration. She looked back at Curtis before he could object. She's probably used to waiting for you. She shouldn't have to. He opened his mouth, closed it. The kind of gratitude that arrives too fast for language left him temporarily without words, which was new. The board voted at 11:15, 9 members present, 8 votes against proceeding with the PharmaDyne agreement pending full forensic review of Westlake's projections and disclosure violations. 1 abstention. The agreement was tabled indefinitely. Rebecca Thorne was already in contact with the State Attorney General's office before the vote was formally recorded. After the room had mostly emptied, attorneys gathering files, board members filing out with the cautious relief of people who had barely avoided something they had not fully understood until it was nearly too late, Miriam found Curtis in the corridor, replacing the cover panel on the electrical housing. Come with me for a moment, she said. She led him down the private hallway to a small room overlooking the hospital's east courtyard, where a maple tree that had been planted at the building's opening was wide and heavy with early autumn color. She closed the door. Then she picked up the copy of the PharmaDyne agreement from a folder she was carrying, the full 63-page document, and set it on the small table between them without signing it. She looked at it, then she looked at him. You saved something today, she said. I want to make sure you understand that. Curtis shook his head slightly. I read a page that landed next to my cart. And then you walked through a door that you had every reason not to walk through. She opened a folder she had been carrying alongside the agreement. I have a position I've been trying to fill for 8 months. Compliance and contracts review. It requires exactly the kind of background you described. She slid the folder toward him. I'd like you to consider it. He looked at the folder without opening it. I pick up my daughter at 3, he said. Every day? Every day she's in school. Then you leave at 2:45. He looked at her. She gets sick sometimes. It's unpredictable. Then you go when she needs you. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the window, a maintenance crew was raking leaves from the courtyard path. He knew 2 of the 3 men out there by name. He had eaten lunch with them in the service break room every Tuesday for 2 years. Before I answer, he said slowly, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. The hospital's night shift maintenance staff. Most of them are running 2 jobs. The benefits package doesn't cover dependents under the current tier structure. Miriam was still. If you're serious about rebuilding the kind of culture where someone feels like they can knock on a boardroom door, he said, it helps if the people doing the work at 5 in the morning don't have to choose between covering their kids' doctors and keeping the lights on. He met her eyes. I'd want a review of the benefit structure before anything changes with my role. She looked at him for a long moment, not surprised exactly, but recalibrated in the way she had been recalibrating since 6:45 that morning. Done, she said. He picked up the folder. He did not open it yet. One more thing, he said. Of course. The oncology ward, 3rd floor. He said it steadily. Whatever happens with the PharmaDyne deal, that ward doesn't close. It doesn't get sold or restructured or rebranded or absorbed. Whatever the corrected numbers look like, that ward stays intact. Miriam said nothing for 3 seconds. My wife was there for 14 months, Curtis said. The people who worked that floor knew her name. They called her Janet, not her room number. They called me Curtis, not the husband. He looked at the maple tree outside the window. That's not something you can rebuild once it's gone. Miriam Stokes, who had run this hospital for 11 years and had delivered hard news to families in waiting rooms more times than she had kept count of, pressed her lips together once before answering. The oncology ward is not going anywhere, she said. That is not on any table, corrected numbers or not. I should have said that first. He nodded. That was enough. He left the building at 12:08. He drove to Carlisle Elementary, turned in the permission slip to the front office in person rather than waiting for the end-of-day delivery, and stood in the parking lot for a moment with his hand on the roof of his truck, looking at the sky over the school's soccer field. The maple trees along the fence line were turning the same color as the one outside Miriam's window. He was standing there, thinking about nothing in particular, when a school bus pulled in for early dismissal and Phoebe materialized from the building doors with her backpack sliding off one shoulder and a drawing rolled up under her arm. She saw him from 30 feet away, and her face did the thing it always did, just opened like a window, like it had been waiting for exactly this. "You came early," she said. "Meeting ended early," he said. She climbed into the truck and buckled herself with the practiced efficiency of a 9-year-old who had been doing it herself since she was 7. What kind of meeting? He thought about Craig Westlake and a contract that had nearly cost 400 people their jobs. He thought about a page drifting to a corridor floor at precisely the wrong moment for everyone who had hoped it wouldn't be found. He thought about Sam Obie's face when the numbers didn't match, and Miriam Stokes setting down an unsigned document and picking up a different folder, and the maple tree outside a window that overlooked a courtyard where 2 maintenance workers named Gerald and Tom were raking leaves and had no idea what had happened 40 feet above them that morning. The kind where somebody needed something fixed, he said. Phoebe accepted this with the trust of someone who has always found her father's answers sufficient. She unrolled her drawing across her lap. A house, a tree, a figure with dark curly hair that was him, a smaller figure beside it that was her, and above them both a careful, deliberate sun with rays that went all the way to the edges of the paper. She had written their names underneath both figures in her careful, oversized second-grade print. Curtis Daye pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward home with the afternoon light coming through the windshield, and Phoebe humming something unidentifiable beside him. And somewhere in the middle of it he understood, not for the first time, but more completely than before, that surviving was not the same as living, and that he had, sometime in the past several hours, crossed a line between the two that he had not known he was approaching.